Soyuz 11. The Soyuz 7K OKS spacecraft was launched on June 6, 1971, from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in the Central Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic, including the 3 cosmonauts to dock with Salyut 1, the world's first space station. Goal of the mission was to perform science experiments, captivating the Soviet public with televised reports during the next 3 weeks. Soyuz 11 successfully docked with Salyut 1 on June 7, 1971, and the cosmonauts remained on board for 22 days, setting space endurance records that would hold until the American Skylab 2 mission in May and June 1973. On the 29th of June 1971, the 3 cosmonauts loaded scientific specimens, films, tapes, and other gear into the Soyuz 11, then transferred manual control back from Salyut 1 to Soyuz 11 and returned to their ferry craft, with undocking occurring at 1828. Soyuz 11 flew co-orbit for a while before it retrofired at 22:35 in preparation for re-entry. Almost 25 minutes later, the Soyuz 11's automatic systems landed the craft at 23:16, 56 miles southwest of Karyazal in Kazakhstan, after an abnormally silent return to Earth. On June 30, 1971, after the capsule returned to Earth, the recovery team knocked on the site, but there was no response. After opening the hatch, they found all 3 men in their couches motionless. They had dark blue patches on their faces and trails of blood from the noses and ears. They brought them out from the capsule. Dobrovolsky was still warm. The autopsies at Burdenko Main Military Clinical Hospital found that the cause of death for the cosmonauts was hemorrhaging of the blood vessels in their brains, with lesser amounts of bleeding under their skin, in their inner ears, and in their nasal cavities, all of which occurred as exposure to a vacuum environment caused the oxygen and nitrogen in their bloodstreams to bubble and rupture vessels. Their blood was also found to contain heavy concentrations of lactic acid. Lactic acid builds up in the body when the cells don't get enough oxygen from the blood. This can happen if there is not enough oxygen in the blood, called hypoxemia, if blood flow is poor, like after sudden decompression, or both. Although they could have remained conscious for almost 40 seconds after decompression began, less than 20 seconds would have passed before the effects of oxygen starvation made it impossible for them to function. The 3 crew members of Soyuz 11 are the only humans to have died in space. Challenger disaster. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida, carrying the 7 crew members to carry out the mission STS-51L. STS-51L was the 25th mission of NASA's Space Shuttle program and the final flight for Space Shuttle Challenger. The crew was scheduled to deploy a commercial communications satellite and study Halley's Comet while they were in orbit, in addition to taking schoolteacher Kristen McAuliffe into space under the Teacher in Space project. The latter task resulted in a higher than usual media interest in and coverage of the mission. It was unusually cold on the morning of the space shuttle's launch. The engineers argued that the Challenger should not take off because the temperature was 31 degrees Fahrenheit, and the O-rings could not seal right if the temperature was under 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The NASA commanders did not agree and said that the backup O-ring would work. They were later proved wrong. The temperature was so low that icicles were hanging from some parts of the launch pad. However, the NASA commanders convinced the engineers' managers to overrule them and approve the launch. Challenger lifted off at 11:38 exactly. In the first 4 seconds of the flight, gray smoke was seen on the launch pad cameras coming out of the aft field joint on the right booster. This was the O-rings being partially destroyed. They had been frozen solid and could not seal, so the blow-off by hot gases burned them away completely before the extrusion could happen. However, aluminium oxide formed by the burning rocket fuel blocked the gap and formed a weak seal. Challenger was safe for now and quickly cleared the launch tower. Challenger flew normally for almost a minute. At the 59-second mark though, the aluminium seal broke. This allowed the burning rocket fuel to escape through the broken part of the O-ring. A visible plume of fire came out of the right SRB, burning both the external fuel tank and the piece of metal keeping the 2 connected. This plume burned through the bottom of the fuel tank, where the liquid hydrogen fuel was stored. At 68 seconds after liftoff, the engines increased power to produce the highest thrust possible, known as throttling up. The flight controllers informed the shuttle crew that their flight status was go at the throttle up stage. The flight commander, Dick Scobie, responded with "Roger, go at throttle up." However, at 72 seconds after liftoff, the fire that had burned through the fuel tank also burned through the connecting metal, leaving the right booster hanging only by the forward attaching point. Challenger suddenly went off its intended path, which may have been felt by the crew. Half a second later, Smith said the last words picked up by the recorder, designed to record all interactions in the crew area of the shuttle during flight. Uh-oh. Smith may have been responding to the shuttle's computer, telling him that the engines were moving quickly to compensate for the now loose booster in a useless attempt to get the shuttle back on the planned path. The right booster, free to swing about its remaining connection, turned outwards and hit the top of the fuel tank, just as the hydrogen tank broke. The burning liquid fuel pushed the hydrogen tank into the now broken upper oxygen tank, destroying both. The two liquid fuel parts combined and exploded in one go, swallowing Challenger in a huge explosion. The booster, being made of thick steel, survived this, and though the explosion itself didn't destroy Challenger directly, it pushed the shuttle into the wrong angle for its flight path through the air, which caused enormous amounts of drag that ripped Challenger apart. The crew cabin was still intact as it started falling, since it was built to be strong. The crew cabin did not have any kind of parachute, and it smashed into the ocean after falling for 2 minutes and 45 seconds at roughly 207 miles per hour. The official report into the disaster says that the crew survived the first breakup and that at least 3 people were still alive. They were able to move switches which required a cover to be pulled off before they could be moved, probably when they tried to regain control of the craft, as well as activate their air packs. However, any crew that might have survived the first breakup died instantly with more than 200 times the force of normal gravity. This is like going from 0 to over 4,400 miles per hour and then slowing back down to 0, all within a second. Many people wanted to know why the Challenger exploded. President Ronald Reagan asked for a report about the disaster. It was called the Rogers Commission Report, and it was written by a group of astronauts, scientists and engineers. They worked out what had happened and why the Challenger exploded. The report said that the people in charge at NASA did not listen to the engineers, who said that the O-rings were not safe, and that sometimes the people in charge thought the parts of the shuttle were well made when they were not. They also wrote that NASA sometimes did unsafe things because people would get angry if the shuttle launches were delayed. Columbia disaster. STS-107 was the 113th flight of the Space Shuttle program and the 28th and final flight of Space Shuttle Columbia. The flight launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, carrying the 7 crew members. Goal of the mission was to conduct a multitude of international scientific experiments during its nearly 16-day stay in space. Columbia launched on January 16, 2003 for what's now known to be its final flight. 81 seconds into the flight, a briefcase-sized part of the external fuel tank's foam insulation, which stops ice from forming while the very cold liquid fuel is in the tank, broke away and hit Columbia. Such debris strikes had happened before, in particular on STS-27, in which a piece of a booster's forward heat shield broke and hit Atlantis' bottom side heat shield, and were seen as an acceptable risk. However, this debris strike hit Columbia's left wing head-on, punching a hole through the panels on the wing's forward edge. Once high-quality video of the launch was ready, NASA reviewed it and concluded that everything was fine, and stopped engineers from using Department of Defense images from orbit to get a closer look. NASA management thought that even if something were wrong, it would be better for the crew not to know, since rescue or repair would be nearly impossible. One flight director contacted Columbia about the concerns, but stressed, "We have seen the same phenomenon on other flights, and there is absolutely no concern for re-entry." On February 1st, Columbia prepared to return to Earth on a path that would take it over the USA from west to east. At 8:15, about an hour before Columbia was due to land, it lit its engines and changed its course so that it would re-enter the atmosphere. A 13-minute video recorded in the cabin, ending 11 minutes before the loss of signal from Columbia, shows the astronauts in good spirits and unaware of the danger. As Columbia entered the atmosphere, the air heated up around it, due to the shuttle moving at extreme speeds, over 20 times the speed of sound. This air was able to enter the wing through the hole made during launch, melting through it and causing the shuttle to lose lift on that side. This caused the shuttle to turn away from its re-entry path, tumble, and break up from the drag of the air. Videos show flashes happening and an unusual trail left behind Columbia, which even hobbyist watchers saw as out of the ordinary. At this point, the temperature of the damaged part of the wing was around 3000 degrees Fahrenheit. By 8:58, Columbia was still moving at incredible speeds, crossed from New Mexico into Texas, at which point it began shedding debris. By this point, several temperature sensors in the damaged left wing had stopped working. The last communication with Commander Rick Husband was
Roger, but...
At 8:59, 45 seconds later, videos from the ground show Columbia breaking apart at 9 o'clock. During re-entry, all 7 of the STS-107 crew members were killed. Mission Control began its disaster procedures at 9:12. Rest in peace.